So there I was, Jake Martinez, hotshot human from good old Earth, strutting through the corridors of the Intergalactic Combat Training Academy like I owned the place. And why shouldn't I? After all, humans had just joined the galactic community, and everyone knows we're the scrappy underdogs who punch above our weight class. At least, that's what I told myself as I gawked at Station Omega-7's impossibly high ceilings and the various alien species milling about. The Academy was supposedly the premier combat training facility in this corner of the galaxy. Think West Point meets Star Trek, except with more species that could accidentally kill you by sneezing too hard. The place buzzed with activity as cadets from dozens of worlds practiced everything from hand-to-hand combat to advanced weapons training. Now I'd done my homework before arriving. The Korathians were the big shots here, literally. 8 feet tall, built like walking tanks, with bone density that would make a rhinoceros jealous. Then you had the Zephyrians, these wispy, ethereal beings who could supposedly read your thoughts and predict your moves before you made them. Finally, there were the mechanoids, cybernetic beings who had replaced most of their organic parts with military-grade hardware. Impressive, sure, but they were all missing one crucial element that humans had perfected over millennia of warfare, bar fights and competitive sports, the absolute refusal to know when we're beaten. Cadet Martinez. A voice boomed behind me like a foghorn in a cathedral. I turned to see Commander Vex Thornwall, a Korathian who looked like someone had crossbred a professional wrestler with a mountain. His grey skin was scarred from what I assumed were countless battles, and his forearms were folded in a way that suggested he was already tired of dealing with me. "That's me, sir," I replied, snapping off what I hoped was a crisp salute, ready to show these aliens how Earth does business. Commander Vex's expression shifted to what I would later learn was the universal look of impending doom. At the time, I interpreted it as admiration for human confidence. "Martinez, you will address all species here as fellow cadets, not aliens. We are all warriors seeking to better ourselves through combat training. Is that understood?" "Absolutely, sir. Though I have to say, it's going to be interesting to see how all these different fighting styles stack up against good old-fashioned human tenacity." The commander's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which I discovered later was the Korathian equivalent of counting to 10 before committing homicide. "Cadet Martinez, you will find that every species here has earned their place through demonstrated combat excellence. I strongly advise against underestimating your fellow warriors." But I was already looking around the training hall, sizing up the competition. How hard could it be? The next morning, I got my first real look at my fellow cadets during the introductory assembly. And let me tell you, it was like walking into a cosmic zoo designed by someone with a really twisted sense of humor. First up was Fizz Sparkbolt, a Zephyrian who looked like what would happen if you crossed a jellyfish with a nervous breakdown. The guy, assuming it was a guy, seemed to flicker in and out of visibility when he got anxious, which was apparently all the time. His psychic abilities were supposedly off the charts, but he jumped every time someone dropped a training weight. Then there was Crankshaft, a mechanoid who had replaced everything except his brain with military hardware. The guy was basically a walking tank with a philosophy degree. He spoke in these slow, measured tones like he was dictating the meaning of life to a court stenographer. Nice enough, but I had to wonder if all that cybernetic enhancement had somehow dampened his sense of urgency. But the real showstopper was Kira Steelwind. Now I'd seen Korathians before, but Kira was something else entirely. She stood about 7.5 feet tall, with the kind of muscle definition that would make a bodybuilder weep with envy. Her grey skin had an almost metallic sheen, and her forearms moved with the precise coordination of a master craftsman. But it was her eyes that really got your attention, cold and calculating, like she was constantly running combat algorithms in her head. According to the scuttlebutt around the academy, Kira had never lost a sparring match. Not once. She'd been at the academy for 2 years and had systematically worked her way through every combat discipline they offered. The medical bay kept a running tally of bones she'd broken during training, and apparently they'd had to switch to a digital counter when the mechanical one ran out of numbers. Naturally, I decided she needed to experience some Earth charm. "Hey there, beautiful," I said, sliding up to her after the assembly. I'm Jake, the new human. I've heard you're pretty good at this fighting stuff. Kira's 4 eyes fixed on me with the intensity of targeting lasers. I am Cadet Steelwind. And yes, I am proficient in combat techniques. Well, maybe you could show me some of those techniques sometime. I'd love to see what you can do with all 4 of those arms. The training hall went quiet. Like horror movie quiet. Even Fizz stopped flickering and stared at me with what I was pretty sure was pure terror. Cadet Martinez, Kira said, her voice carrying the warmth of liquid nitrogen. I do not provide personal training sessions. If you wish to test your abilities, you are welcome to volunteer for sparring demonstrations. Maybe I will. I shot back, because apparently my mouth had declared independence from my brain. I'd be curious to see how those fancy alien techniques hold up against some good old Earth fighting. The silence stretched out like a funeral dirge. Crankshaft slowly turned his mechanical head toward me with a sound like grinding gears. Cadet Martinez, he said in his deliberate way, I believe you may have misunderstood the nature of our training protocols here. But I was on a roll. Look, I'm sure you're all very impressive with your natural advantages and whatnot, but humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've perfected the art of controlled violence. We've got instincts that you just can't program or evolve. Now, Kawaii. Fizz had started flickering again, this time so rapidly he looked like a disco ball having a seizure. In fact, I continued, warming to my theme. I volunteer for the next sparring demonstration. I think it's time someone showed you all what human determination looks like. Kira's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. It was subtle, like watching a landslide start with a single pebble. Very well, Cadet Martinez. I accept your challenge. And that, my friends, was the moment I should have realized that confidence and stupidity often travel together. The sparringer was a thing of beauty, assuming your definition of beauty included potential for grievous bodily harm. The floor was covered in some kind of shock-absorbing material that could apparently handle impacts that would crater concrete. Energy shields surrounded the fighting area, both to protect spectators and to contain any debris that might result from enthusiastic combat techniques. The medical bay was positioned directly adjacent to the arena, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a friendly wrestling match. The second clue was the way the medical staff started prepping trauma kits the moment they heard my name mentioned. But I was feeling good, you know? I'd spent my whole life playing contact sports, doing martial arts, getting into the occasional bar fight. I was quick, I was tough, and I had that special human quality that made us think we could take on anything the universe threw at us. Cadet Martinez, Commander Vex said, approaching me as I stretched near the arena, are you certain you wish to proceed with this demonstration? Absolutely, Commander. I think it's important to show these cadets that humans didn't claw their way to the top of Earth's food chain by backing down from a challenge. The commander's 4 eyes did that blinking thing again. Cadet Steelwind has extensive combat training. Her techniques are quite advanced. I laughed, because apparently my survival instincts had taken the day off. Commander, with all due respect, I'd been fighting since I could walk. Street fighting, boxing, wrestling, mixed martial arts. I've seen every dirty trick in the book. How different can alien fighting be? Around the arena, cadets were gathering to watch the spectacle. I noticed a lot of them were placing bets, and the odds seemed heavily stacked against me. Fizz was so nervous he'd started making small popping sounds every time he flickered. Even Crankshaft had positioned himself with a clear view of the medical bay. The odds are currently running 47-1 against your survival, Crankshaft informed me helpfully. Though I should note that survival and victory are being calculated as separate outcomes. Thanks for the vote of confidence, buddy. Kira entered the arena like she was walking to the grocery store. No fanfare, no dramatic posturing, just a calm, professional assessment of the space and her opponent. She was wearing the standard academy training gear, which on her looked like it had been designed by someone who really understood the aesthetics of efficient violence. She began her warm-up routine, and I'll admit, it was impressive. She moved through a series of stretches and forms that flowed like a deadly dance. Her forearms moved independently, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic. But what struck me most was her expression, or rather, the complete lack of one. She wasn't angry, excited, or nervous. Wajen, Midob. She was just ready. Fighters, take your positions, Commander Vex announced. I bounced on my toes, shaking out my arms, getting loose. I'd learned long ago that the key to winning a fight was to stay relaxed, until the moment you needed to explode into action. I grinned at Kira across the arena. Don't worry, I called out. I'll try to go easy on you. That's when she assumed her fighting stance, and I made my fatal mistake. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, because her stance looked like something out of a martial arts movie. All four arms positioned at different angles, her weight distributed in a way that looked completely impractical, her center of gravity seemingly all wrong. It looked like she was trying to perform some kind of interpretive dance rather than prepare for combat. Oh, come on, I said, still chuckling. What is that supposed to be? Some kind of fancy alien kung fu? The arena went dead silent. Even the energy shields seemed to stop humming. Kira's expression finally changed, just slightly. The corners of her mouth moved in what might generously be called a smile, but it was the kind of smile that glaciers probably made when they were about to carve icebergs. Begin, Commander Vex said, and his voice carried the tone of someone announcing an execution. I was still smiling when Kira moved. Later, when I was trying to piece together what happened from my hospital bed, various witnesses would describe the fight in detail. Since I was unconscious for most of it, I had to rely on their accounts, which all agreed on one thing: it was the most educational 10 seconds in the Academy's history. According to Fizz, who had stopped flickering long enough to watch in horror, Kira moved like physics was just a suggestion she chose to ignore. Her forearms created a pattern of attacks that came from angles I hadn't even known existed. Her first strike was a feint with her upper left arm that drew my guard high, while her lower right arm swept my legs. As I started to fall, her upper right arm caught me with a precision strike to a pressure point that apparently shut down my nervous system's ability to process pain. Crankshaft, with his cybernetic enhancements, was able to track the action in slow motion. He later described it as a masterpiece of biomechanical efficiency and a textbook example of why overconfidence is the enemy of tactical awareness. He was particularly impressed by the way Kira used my own momentum against me, turning my aggressive charge into a perfect setup for what he called systematic structural disassembly. But the real kicker, the moment that would become legend throughout the Academy, happened when I was already halfway to the ground. I was falling backward, my vision blurring, my body refusing to respond to commands from my brain. And in that moment, some primitive part of my hindbrain decided to make one last desperate attempt at salvaging my dignity. I threw a wild haymaker punch. It was the kind of punch you throw when you're drowning and trying to hit the water. Completely uncontrolled, telegraphed from orbit, and utterly without any tactical merit. But somehow, through sheer dumb luck, it was actually heading toward Kira's midsection. That's when she caught my fist with her lower left hand. Not blocked. Not deflected. Caught, like she was plucking an apple from a tree. For a moment we were frozen in this bizarre tableau, me falling backward, my fist held motionless in her grip, her three other arms positioned with mathematical precision around my body. And then, with the casual efficiency of someone opening a stubborn jar, she twisted. The sound my arm made was like a tree branch snapping in a windstorm, sharp, clean, and utterly final. I hit the arena floor like a sack of broken groceries, and the last thing I saw before the pain medication kicked in was Kira standing over me, her expression as calm and professional as if she'd just finished filing paperwork. Medical assistance required in the sparring arena, she said into her comm unit, a voice carrying no more emotion than a weather report. One broken ulnar, possible concussion, minor contusions, standard trauma protocols should be sufficient. As the medical team rushed in, I could hear Commander Vex addressing the stunned crowd of cadets. Let this serve as a reminder that there is no shame in defeat, only in failing to learn from it. Cadet Steelwind. Excellent demonstration of controlled force application. Cadet Martinez will recover fully, though his pride may require more extensive treatment. And that, folks, was how I learned that laughing at a Korathian's fighting stance was roughly equivalent to challenging a hurricane to a breath-holding contest. 3 days later, I woke up in the Academy's medical wing with my right arm encased in what looked like a high-tech cast crossed with a piece of modern art. The pain was manageable, thanks to some truly impressive alien painkillers, but my ego was still in intensive care. "Ah, the legendary Jake Martinez awakens," came a familiar mechanical voice. Crankshaft was sitting beside my bed, his optical sensors glowing softly in the dim light. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a freight train that was also somehow disappointed in me," I replied, trying to sit up. "How long was I out?" 72 hours and 14 minutes. Your recovery time was actually quite impressive. Most organic beings require significantly longer after encountering Kira's combat techniques. Most organic beings? Oh yes. You are far from her first sparring partner, though you are the first to laugh at her fighting stance. That was genuinely unprecedented. Over the next few days, as I lay there feeling sorry for myself, I started getting visitors. Fizz would flicker in and out of the room, gradually becoming more solid as he got comfortable. He'd bring me updates on Academy gossip and, eventually, some uncomfortable truths about my performance. "The thing is, Jake," he said during one of his more stable moments, "we all knew what was going to happen. Kira's techniques aren't just advanced, they're designed specifically for combat against multiple species. She's studied the anatomy, reflexes, and fighting patterns of dozens of different beings. Then why didn't anyone warn me?" "We tried," Fizz replied, flickering slightly with what I was learning to recognize as embarrassment. "But you seemed so confident, and humans have this reputation for being, well, stubborn." "Stubborn." Aggressively optimistic in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, Crankshaft added, having just entered the room. "It is considered one of your species' more endearing qualities, though it does lead to frequent medical interventions." It was during my second week of recovery that Kira finally visited. She appeared in my doorway like a controlled avalanche, still carrying that aura of casual lethality that had become so familiar. "Cadet Martinez," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed with surprising grace. "How is your recovery progressing?" "Well, I can wiggle my fingers without screaming, so that's progress." "Good. I wanted to discuss our sparring session." I braced myself for either an apology or a lecture, but what I got was something else entirely. "You have potential," she said simply. "Your physical conditioning is adequate, your reflexes are above average for your species, and your pain tolerance is impressive. But your tactical awareness is essentially non-existent." "Thanks for the pep talk, coach. I am not offering encouragement, Martinez. I am providing analysis. You approached our combat with the assumption that your natural advantages would compensate for your lack of training. This is a common mistake among new cadets, but usually not to such an extreme degree." She leaned forward, her 4 eyes focusing on me with uncomfortable intensity. "Do you know why I do not apologize for breaking your arm? Because you're a stone-cold killer with no human emotions. Because in real combat, your opponents will not warn you when you are making fatal mistakes. They will not give you time to reconsider your tactics. They will simply kill you. I provided you with a valuable lesson at the cost of temporary injury. In actual warfare, such lessons are typically permanent." I stared at her for a long moment, processing what she'd said. "So you're saying you did me a favor?" "I am saying I treated you as a warrior rather than a fragile child. The question now is whether you will learn from this experience or simply sulk until your arm heals. And you know what? For the first time since arriving at the Academy, I started to understand what I was really dealing with here." 6 months later, I was back in the sparring arena, but this time I was the one providing commentary to a group of new human cadets who'd just arrived from Earth. And wouldn't you know it, they had exactly the same attitude I'd shown up with. The key thing to remember, I told them as we watched Kira demonstrate advanced combat techniques, is that everything you think you know about fighting is probably wrong, or at least incomplete. "Come on, Martinez," one of the new arrivals said, a cocky kid named Tommy who reminded me way too much of myself. "She's impressive, sure, but humans have been perfecting combat for millennia. We've got instincts these aliens could never understand." I held up my right arm, which still bore the faint lines of where the healing accelerators had done their work. "See this? This is what happens when human instincts meet Carathian technique. Spoiler alert, the technique wins. What I'd learned during my recovery was that human adaptability really was our greatest strength, but only when it was combined with enough humility to actually adapt. Once I stopped trying to prove that Earth fighting was superior and started learning from the various species around me, my improvement was dramatic. Kira had been right about my potential. Under her guidance, I'd learned to incorporate elements from multiple fighting disciplines. From the Carathians, I learned efficiency and biomechanical precision. From the Zephyrians, I developed better situational awareness and the ability to read opponents' intentions. From the mechanoids, I gained tactical thinking and the importance of preparation. But the most important lesson came from humans' greatest strength, our ability to synthesize different approaches into something new. While other species had perfected their individual techniques, humans had the flexibility to combine elements from multiple traditions. During the graduation ceremony, I stood with my fellow cadets as Commander Vex addressed our class. We'd lost about 30% of the original enrollment, but those who remained had earned their place through demonstrated competence rather than natural advantages. "You have learned that true strength comes not from what you are born with, but from what you choose to do with your capabilities," the commander said. "Each species brings unique advantages to combat, but victory belongs to those who understand and respect the abilities of others." After the ceremony, Kira approached me one final time. "I have a proposition for you, Martinez." "I'm listening." "The Academy is establishing a new program for cross-species combat instruction. They need instructors who understand multiple fighting disciplines and can teach adaptive techniques. Are you interested?" I looked around at the academy that had become my home, at the species that had become my teachers and friends, and at the new batch of human cadets who were probably about to make all the same mistakes I had. "You know what, Kira? I think I'd like that. Someone needs to warn the next batch of humans about the dangers of laughing at alien fighting stances." "Indeed," she replied, and for the first time since I'd known her, she actually smiled, "though I suspect they will not listen any more than you did." "Probably not. But at least when they end up in the medical wing, they'll understand why." And that's how I learned that the best way to earn respect in the galaxy isn't to prove you're better than everyone else. It's to prove you're smart enough to learn from people who could break your arm without blinking. Though I still maintain that human stubbornness is a valuable trait. It's just that wisdom involves knowing when to be stubborn and when to shut up and listen to the 7-foot-tall combat expert who's offering to teach you how not to get killed. Because at the end of the day, the galaxy is a big, dangerous place filled with beings who've been perfecting the art of violence for longer than humans have had fire. But if you're willing to learn, willing to adapt, and willing to admit when you're wrong, then maybe, just maybe, you can earn a place among the stars. Even if it costs you a perfectly good arm in the process,